Hi, my name's Bob Fram. I had the privilege of serving in REME for 28 years and I was commanding officer of 6th Battalion REME in 2007. We're going to talk about What's on Your Mind project today, and I'm with a very good friend of mine, Dr. Mark Coombe.
Hi, so my name's Dr. Mark Coombe, and I served as a medical officer in the Army for 10 years, and I spent the last 25 years working in the NHS.
And the idea of this little talk is just as a personal experience of post-traumatic stress and some PTSD. And what we're going to talk about is the situation we found ourselves in, the stresses that caused us to feel the way we did, the impact of that, the consequences, and also reflecting back on what actually helped. So talking about the situation, it's not the situation actually, but the impact on the human. So everyone will react differently to an abnormal situation. And both of us have been in particularly stressful positions. Mark, I think you were in Garajda?
Yeah, so I was part of a United Nations force that went to prevent the ethnic cleansing that had happened in the enclaves in the former Yugoslavia. And so some of you may remember Srebrenica, where 40,000 young men were murdered. We went into the third enclave to try and protect that with a very small force against a very large force.
And I was commanding a smaller team in the middle of Basra in 2007 during some of the most violent attacks from the militia. And I think our situations were very similar. We were in an isolated location under constant threat and constant attacks, the potential to be overrun with no rescue. And both of us were in, well, I was in the command position and Mark was also in a position of responsibility.
Yeah, and I think much that being a commanding officer and a medical officer is a very different role, then I still had huge responsibility for my team, but also my patients, because we had very little access to any sort of advanced care. So whatever treatment that we needed to give, we had to give there and then, and often we wouldn't be able to get help for 3 or 4 days. So that puts people in huge risk. And of course, as a doctor, you feel responsible.
And I think that feeling of responsibility adds to the stresses, and those stresses certainly that I felt, we were under constant attack. Isolated location, I think we were 40 minutes, at least 40 minutes fighting time from rescue. But I had a team of 70 in them working with the Iraqi police under constant attack. And in combat every day. I think we had 2 days in 3 months where we had nothing going on. So violence and its effects were all around us. And the one thing that I recall when reflecting back is actually I was in a position where I was willing to kill someone and without worrying too much about that because of the situations I was in.
It's interesting because I remember very clearly I'd been back about a month or so and I went to go and see a film at the cinema, and when I was speaking to my friends in the pub that evening about it, they said we really didn't like it because it was so violent. And I said, I didn't notice. And about 10 years later, I went and saw that film again. I was amazed at the level of violence. And so it becomes a normality. Equally, I remember I'd only been in the enclave a few days, and we got mortared and then shot at. And I was diving on the floor and trying to protect myself. And I watched some of the people who'd been there longer than me, and they just all sat round very sort of as if nothing was happening. And, you know, a few months later, I was that person who was sat there watching these other people throw themselves on the floor to try and protect themselves. So it's this sort of normalising of something which isn't normal.
Yeah, and I think also I found that the loss of personnel through injury and death, I didn't feel that at the time because I was busy getting on with my job, because I had a huge fear of failure. But it was later when you reflect on that, and we'll come on to that and the guilt part of any traumatic situation. But also that position of responsibility means you are a little bit lonely. And I had no outlet for that stress when it was happening because everyone was looking at me and I'd go, oh, it is me, I'm in charge, I'm the one that's got to make the decision. I don't know if you feel.
I mean, we were very lucky in that nobody died. We had some people who had gunshot wounds and who were blown up. But funnily enough, the thing that affected me when I got back, I had a recurring nightmare that somebody did die and I couldn't stop it. So even though I didn't end up having loss of life, it was almost the lack of loss of life in a way that triggered my problems, going forward. And so for me, you don't necessarily just have to lose life to be hugely traumatized by a situation.